Hello, happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome to the MediaJel podcast, where we cover the latest in marketing trends and strategies that are most effective in growing your cannabis dispensary, delivery service, or brand. We help cannabis companies advertise through paid search, SEO, and programmatic advertising here at MediaJel to increase foot traffic, awareness, and e-commerce sales. I'm your host, Guillermo Bravo, and today we'll be discussing cannabis brand market expansion. I'm super excited to introduce Joe Hodes, who's the CMO of Wana Brands, to today's podcast. Joe serves as the Chief Marketing Officer for Wana, where he's responsible for generating revenue, creating innovative and refined marketing campaigns for the organization, as well as helping to grow Wana's brand, market share, and customer loyalty. Joe's been in the business for a long time. He's been an early professional and marketer in the cannabis industry, working with Dixie Elixirs as his first CMO, helping build that into one of the most recognized national cannabis brands. And welcome to the show, Joe.
Thanks, Guillermo. Appreciate it. It's funny. I always feel like when someone reads bio on me, I'm like, I gotta rework that thing. It's too long and wordy. So I'll keep that note for this time.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking back to my career in cannabis, you're one of the first people I met, on the marketing front back in like 2014, 2015. So it's nice to see a familiar face that's been in the game for, close to 8 years now.
It's probably, I would think it was when MJ Biz was still at the Rio that we probably first met in person. So
it was a much smaller MJ BizCon at that time.
Yeah, indeed.
Times have changed. Well, excited to have you on and share with our audience different ways that they can break into new markets.
Well, thanks. I'm excited to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. And this is one of the biggest challenges I think that brands have is figuring this out. And by the way, no matter what we talk about today, I can tell you it's not totally figured out. So there is no secret sauce, no perfect model. I can only speak to experiences I've had and what does and doesn't work. But at some point there hopefully will be a day where we can expand the way that all other brands and all other industries do.
Yeah, we just need to be at the same level as everyone else and given the same shot. And 280, some of these other cannabis related factors like crossing state lines and all these other challenges that we have to deal with that other industries don't. Those need to be fixed before you really have a shot to compete on at the same rate as other industries.
Yep, indeed.
I guess on the to get things started, how do you know you're truly ready to expand your brand into a new market?
It's a great question, and it's one that I think often doesn't get asked enough or looked at enough, right? Because brands will, and I've seen it a million times, like, okay, we got a product, we got a little traction. What's our next market? How's our growth? So people are looking at brand market expansion as a way to fuel growth, which certainly is a strategy, and it's not a bad one. But what happens is because of the complexity of this industry, when you don't have, first of all, dedicated resources, right? Critically important. You got to have a team that's all they do is they focus on market expansion. And at Wana, for example, we have really two sides of that. We have a team that is focused operationally on that expansion. And then I also have a brand expansion team. So they are strictly focused on supporting that market expansion in each new market we go into, and then kind of collectively as a whole supporting the expansion process. So having the right people in place to do it is one thing. Two, having really strong and clear SOPs that you have not only the SOP, but a way to ensure that your partners adhere to that. So that when they get the information and you do the training for them, that they, one, can follow it. Two, that you can make sure that from a QA perspective, they're following what you've asked them to do. And then lastly, that there's never a point at which you have to worry about whether or not there's been a deviation from an SOP because there wasn't information, right? Like, so in other words, the SOPs have to be as complete as possible. So really testing those and making sure that they're pretty foolproof is critically important. And then I would say lastly is ensure that if you have limited resources, which most brands and most cannabis companies do, right, to a certain extent, that you've fully utilized the resources in the existing market you're in before you say, okay, we're going to go to the next market, the next market, the next market, because every time you do that, you're bifurcating each, those resources, right? So make sure you're at a point where you're mature enough in a given market that you're ready to take it to the next market.
Yeah, I mean, make sure that if you're owning your category like edibles, right? Make sure you are owning that category in that state, and that you've done everything you can to get as much market share before you even consider moving on to the next state. Because then you have to find partners. There's just a whole nother level of complexity to that. So
Absolutely.
can you walk us through, high level bullet points of, what a brand needs to have in order before even considering expanding a new market?
Well, I think one thing is, and you just said it actually, was partner, right? So most brands currently, and there's really two different models primarily. One, you go into a new market, you secure your own license, you secure your own facilities, you manage that entire end-to-end process, which is extremely capital intensive rather, and requires hiring people on the ground locally in that market and all those other parts and pieces that would maybe potentially slow expansion for some brands, or you go more an asset light model, which is what Wana does, and you find a partner. But the challenge with that, of course, is finding the right partner, right? So there's a whole qualification process, and I mean to use a fairy tale example, you got to kiss a lot of frogs, right? To you find that right partner that that can both be aligned with you philosophically, aligned with you culturally, that knows how to produce, that knows how to also handle distribution and all the other intricacies of each individual market. So that's really critically important, is finding the right partner. Two, make sure you're resourced. I mean, it sounds simple and obvious, right? But understand that whatever you think is going to cost you to expand to a new market, double or triple that. I mean, and if you don't have that cash aside that's not being funded from your existing operations and you're going month to month, if you don't have that kind of set aside to be able to do the expansion, it's going to be challenging. You're going to run into issues. Three, and I generally don't promote lawyers, but you gotta have a strong contract. You gotta have a legal team that can look at a contract and make sure that every single question is answered. And honestly, Wana didn't have that for a long time. We didn't have a really, ironclad contract that we had, a lot of legal input into. We've gotten there, but we've gotten there painfully and looking at the mistakes along the way. But if you start out with a really strong contract and everyone is clear on the terms and what revenue shares look like and what production responsibilities they have, and everyone's clear on that, and it's written and on a contract, you're going to end up with a better result, and you're going to end up with less situations where you've got finger pointing going on and one partner says you were supposed to do this and we were supposed to do that, and it doesn't happen, right? So I think those are some really critical pieces to ensuring that before you go into a market, you're prepared.
Yeah, finding that right partner is key, right? It's you're going to battle together. It's not easy in the cannabis industry. We know the challenges that you have to deal with. So you want to make sure that they're ready to go to war with you, and whether it's the legal front and whether it's compliance, marketing, competing for market share, like against some other well-funded companies. Like it's not we're not printing money here. It's like, we used to see the green rush back in like early 10 years ago, and it's not as easy as you think.
No, gosh, no. And you just mentioned something too that kind of sort of circles back to the lawyer thing, but compliance, making sure that your partner has compliance resources, because truthfully, particularly in new markets, but even in mature markets, no one's going to know compliance as well as someone on the ground who holds a license, who is, responsible for that compliance locally, because things change. And sometimes it's a grapevine, like, hey, I heard that, that they're making a change to the regs and we have to do X, Y, and Z. If you are not on top of that, if your partner's not on top of that, you can waste a lot of time, get yourself in trouble, waste a lot of money. So that's another piece I should have mentioned. And then I did forget one more thing, which is do your market analysis, understand what the market is, because we like to say here, Eric Block, our chief revenue officer, it's his favorite saying, so I'm going to give him credit for it. So when he listens to this, he doesn't give me shit about it, is every market is a market. And it's true. Like, they're each unique and different in terms of what's the consumer demand, what products do well, what distribution looks like. So really understand the market and don't just say, well, I've got a great brand here, I can just drop it in there, it'll be perfect. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I mean, even like consumer education, the cannabis curious consumers, East Coast is a lot different than West Coast. how long has cannabis been around culturally in the different regions. Could be political values, like all these different things have an impact on how they're going to engage with the cannabis brand.
And I see it from like some of the early markets, California, Colorado, maybe Oregon, where, we all have this belief like we're OG and, everyone wants our brand because it's Colorado or it's California. I think I see it more predominantly in California, frankly. But just because it's a California brand doesn't mean it's going to play in New York or Missouri for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. As far as a budget, like what is like a rough budget someone would need to even consider an expansion? Is that even?
I wouldn't even begin to know how to calculate that because there's so many factors, right? In terms of, what's the CapEx to start up a facility? What kind of growth projections do you have for yourself? I mean, if you're a company that's small and you're looking to get into a new market and you're like, hey, we're in 10 stores by the end of the year, we're doing great. That's going to require a different budget than let's say Wana, where we want to be number one in every market we go into. So, and have a really broad, expansive footprint. And so it's a really tough question to answer. It's an individual case basis, I think, on the company.
Yeah, it might be like a percentage of revenue or something, but who knows? Really make that case yourself to the CFO.
Yeah, and hopefully you're doing your analysis and you're saying, okay, well, this is what it's going to cost us. Whether if you go the full model or whether you go the asset light model, hey, here is what's going to cost us to go into each of these new markets. And some of those, if it's your first market, might be the startup cost of saying, do I have the staff? Do I have the contract and the lawyers? All that stuff in place. So there's kind of that piece, which becomes, you amortize that over each market you go into. But then in terms of being in the market, it's, do I have all the displays I need? Do I have all the packaging ordered? Do I have, all of those parts and pieces that you need to make sure that you've forecasted for? And then, like I said earlier, 2 or 3x that, and then you've got enough cash, baby.
Exactly. Make sure your bank is full and you're ready for some unplanned for expenses.
Exactly. Yep.
What are some of the obstacles that brands may face when considering an expansion?
Well, I think a couple of things. So as a brand, one of the biggest obstacles, the most obvious ones, is the fact that because regulation is different by market, it's hard to have brand consistency. So, our packaging in Florida is black and white. We're not allowed any branding on it. It says Wana, luckily, but that's about it. And the gummies had to be formulated differently because we weren't allowed to have color in any of the gummies. And they're not called gummies, by the way. They're called chews in Florida. So that immediately poses challenges from a brand consistency standpoint. Now, not to pat ourselves in the back, but a brand like Wana has decent brand recognition within the cannabis industry. So most consumers that are coming across us aren't like, oh, I've never heard of Wana. What is that? A lot of them have at least heard of us or tried us in different states. So we have that added benefit. If you're a brand new brand that's never been in market and people aren't familiar with you, it's really challenging to create that brand consistency. So we benefit in the sense that we're in enough states now and we have enough brand recognition that if we're in a Florida where we can't have the branding, we're still drawing from other experiences in other markets where people understand the brand. But again, if you're brand new, you might not have that. So that's one, is just the straight up packaging branding elements. Two is if you're challenged from a product standpoint. So whether that's dosing or, for example, in most recent changes in Oregon with cannabinoids and CBN, for example, if your lead product is a sleep product and you've launched in Oregon and then you got to pull CBN out of that product to be able to sell it in Oregon, you create some product inconsistencies and you may damage the effectiveness of a product as well if you were to do that. So that's a brand challenge. And I think lastly, for the asset light model that we do, what we've begun doing now, and this is again learning from experience and pain, is we have brand ambassadors, we have field marketing managers in each market, so that we can have a little bit more control of the brand voice. Because as much as you want your partner to live and breathe your brand, and in some markets we're almost there where they're like they might as well be Wana. It is a challenge to ensure that your brand voice and what you represent as a brand is communicated down to the budtenders and the consumers in those markets if you're not doing it yourself.
Yeah, and you touched on a few things, and we haven't. Brand equity is huge, right? And it's something that Wana has established. Like how important is this? when you're expanding in new markets? And does this give you, negotiating power when you're trying to get on dispensary shelves and reach decision makers?
Absolutely. Right. And I think what was interesting too, like, when you look at the pandemic and the fact that brick and mortar became a little bit more challenging, many companies, dispensaries, the buyers as well as the consumers were defaulting to brands they were familiar with. So if I'm going to spend dollars, and I can't be in a dispensary and I can't talk to a budtender about it at any length, I'm just going to go to the tried and true. And so for us, that was a benefit, right? Because people knew Wana, or we have certainly enough scale that people have the experience with us that they know to go back to Wana because it was consistent and, all the other great things we like to say about ourselves. If you're a brand new product, you had a much harder time both getting on the shelf, even the virtual shelf, and also attracting the consumer because you didn't have the ability to go through the normal process that you might with budtender education and down to the consumer. And so I think that was a real challenge and I think that's where brand equity makes a big difference. But I'll caveat that by saying, if you're in a market and you have a really strong partner who has an existing portfolio, of products, that obviously can benefit you because it's all about right now still relationships locally. No matter the size of the market, it's always about those local relationships and the buyers and the brands. So if you've got a partner that really has those strong relationships, that can certainly benefit you as a new brand.
Yeah, what are some tips for people as far as building their brand in their brand equity? Like, what are some of the things that they should prioritize to really cement themselves in the industry?
Well, I mean, are we talking like from an expansion standpoint or just more broadly?
Just broadly, like product consistency is huge, right?
I can easily answer that. I'll tell you, there's really only a handful of things that I think are most critical. One, be different, like have something that is unique and special, and focus on innovation, focus on bringing something to market that no one else has, or at the very least improve on what everyone else has, right? So do something with your product set that is different, that draws in the consumer and says, okay, I want that product because it offers me the thing that none of the other products do. Two is ensure quality and consistency, right? And that's not just of the product. So this is an industry that is rife with products that, because the science isn't fully there, they're still inconsistent at times. And that's on the product side. But when you talk about like everything from, is your sales team, respectful to deliver when they say they're going to deliver? Is your brand promise fulfilled upon every single touch point with the consumer? All of those things, when I say consistency, are really important for the brand. So it starts with the product, but it also emanates out from there in terms of how you conduct yourself and what the business is. And I think lastly is, and this is one that I think is really interesting in this day and age, which is, I think consumers want brands to stand for something. I don't mean to sound like that's not obvious, but they want brands to stand for something and to understand what they stand for. And even if it's not a social issue or something of that nature, be clear about who you are and know that, the best brands don't necessarily serve all consumers initially, right? They have a perspective in who they're serving and who their targets are and what they're trying to do with their products and their brand. And so I think it's important for us, particularly as we grow as an industry, to just make sure if you're a brand that you know what you stand for.
Yeah, be authentic, right?
And that's part of that, is be authentic. Yes.
So if I'm a brand and I want to break into a new state, I don't have the brand equity that Wana has. Like, how do I get in front of decision makers at a dispensary to get on those shelves?
Great question. And part A of that is part A is if you have a partner in the market, make sure you have a partner that first of all lives and breathes your product, and secondly has the connections already, the deeper connections. That's the easiest entree, right? So if my partner is producing for us in a market that we're not, a lot of people know us, which luckily doesn't happen as much anymore, but if they can be that warm entree and then I can, not me, but I as the company can back that up with, our content, our information, our education, store visits, really reinforce that brand at the store level. That's a great way to do it. Now, if you're managing your own process in a given market, let's say you own the license in the facility and you're a new brand launching, I think traditional CPG marketers would probably think in terms of spending dollars on consumer campaigns. and reaching that end user consumer.
Yep.
That's still a little bit elusive. And of course, MediaJel is really helping to try to solve some of those problems about how to reach that consumer and drive them into the store. But if you're a brand in particular, that can be a little bit challenging and also extremely costly, right? So, getting to the end user consumer and driving traffic that way can be tough. I think back to the idea of being authentic, if you can be really authentic, if you're differentiated, if you understand the market itself and you understand where the gaps are and you can help fill those gaps, that's a big piece of getting on the shelf. And then I think it's repetition. I mean, I see, us and other companies that are just constantly in market, in stores, reinforcing the brand, reinforcing our relationships. And that's kind of what you have to do. You have to be able to hit that wall multiple times before you break through. And that just requires patience. And back to the earlier point about cash, it requires a long fuse, right? So that you can make sure it happens.
Yeah, you need to invest in those vendor days, those relationships, those marketing materials. For the Budtenders, they're on your front lines. They're really pushing your product, right? So you have to get them to be your advocates.
Yep.
What type of growth goals or milestones should a brand set to keep them on track?
Yeah, and I think that it's really an individualized question on a per company basis. Like I mentioned earlier, it depends upon what your goals are. I mean, for us, we're in the process of developing some OKRs right now, some objectives and key results around what does that look like, what do we want out of each market, and in some cases, maybe it's top line. In other cases, it's bottom line. In terms of profitability in a given market, and in some cases, it's simply how many storefronts are we in, right? But setting that intention and saying, this is our goal, did we reach it? Great point, critically important for brands, because if you just go into a market and say, well, we're in a new market now, how do you know if you're succeeding, right? And it's not the same for everybody, right? Depends upon the company. I know a lot of companies are really focused on top line because they're publicly traded or they want to be acquired and they want to really grow that top line. That's great. I'm not, disparaging that. For Wana, it's about profitability and making sure that we're using our dollars wisely and being profitable in a given market. And it's also, a little bit about what's the impact we can have in the community, not just as it relates to cannabis, but more broadly. Do we have opportunities to really support our partner in that community through our CSR efforts and other things that we do in our markets?
Thank you for that, Joe. We have some questions from the audience here. What's your thoughts on entering Europe and South American markets?
Great question, and really excited at some point to be able to do that. I'm hearing that potentially Colombia is looking, and I'm speaking about this from a Wana perspective, which edibles are not at this point, to my knowledge at least, allowed in any South American or European markets. But we are hearing that Colombia is either in the process of or has already put out some regs that relates to edibles, so that's potentially possible. But as far as Europe goes, it's still a little bit off limits for edibles companies, but I think that is a huge opportunity. But I think where people sometimes get, I'll say, tripped up is that we still have so much to do here in the US, or North America, at least, between Canada and the US, that you also need to look at that and say, okay, what's it going to cost me to figure out a completely different country, different regulations, different economics, different culture, and what's it going to cost me to do that versus what are my opportunities here in the States? So it's a bright, shiny object. And I think Europe and South America are wonderful opportunities down the road. But I think for many companies, there's so much still left to be done here that it may not make financial sense.
Yeah. So it's just planning when the timing is right. Thank you, Aaron Gorman, for that question. I have another question from Brian Passon.
I can't do that question.
No. All right.
Hopefully Brian was laughing at that. Okay, go ahead.
What can or should marketing do for Cannabis Brand to keep it moving off the shelves without heavily discounting during the difficult times when it seems like everyone is diminishing their brand value by offering steep and consistent discounts to move product?
Brian, I'll send you coffee for that softball later, but discounting it's a huge problem that we're trying to kind of figure out, right? We're scratching our heads on this because discounting, it helps the consumer. Okay, so don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's not a benefit to anybody, but it means lower top line revenue for the dispensaries. It means pricing compression for the brands. Yep. And it is also like a disease. It's insidious. And when, dispensary across the street starts discounting, then that the other dispensary has to start discounting. Then they go to the brands and say, you need to start discounting. And it spreads, right? Like wildfire. And so all of a sudden, if everyone's leading with price, what are you going to do? You're going to train the consumer to think price only. And I think, for most industries, for most other CPG type models and retail models, I can't think of another one where it's entirely based on discounting. Even let's say clothing, right? You have certain retailers like Ross or Nordstrom Rack or whatever that are focused on that discounting, right? And the consumer knows that, and that's where they go if they want something discounted. But in the normal retail environment, they get all kinds of cues to say like, oh, I like the packaging, the design on that one. I'm willing to pay a premium price, or oh, premium price means it's a better product, or oh, it has differentiated technology, so the price is different. We hear so often from dispensaries that they want to just like, oh, it's a gummy, so we're going to price all gummies at $15. That makes no sense in any other industry. So why do we do it in ours? And then they want to discount on top of that and start driving traffic by offering 2-for-1s left and right. That is going to be a significant problem for this industry. It's going to continue to be. It already is. Sorry, it's going to continue to be a significant problem in this industry. And for Wana, it's a real dance that we have to do, because we are a premium brand and a premium product, and we invest a ton of money and time into R&D, into the quality of the ingredients, using organic tapioca and using our Azuka partners, their technology for the fast acting. So we have an actual fast acting product versus just saying it's fast acting. And so we, I think, deserve and want a premium for that, because we're investing in that, right? And we want to be able to pass it along to the consumer. And by the way, guess what? There are consumers who are willing to pay for that. They want differentiated products, right? So it's a real mess that we're in right now. And I think for brands, I think brands, particularly the retail side of things, they don't always think about the fact that if you are always on sale, then you become you're a discounter. You're not a premium anymore, because you're a discounter. That's what you do. So it's a point of differentiation for us, but it is a never ending battle to stay on top of that.
Yeah. Can you establish like an MSRP and then enforce that across retail locations? Is that not possible in this industry?
No, it's not. I mean, everything, even like the simplest thing of saying, okay, if we're going to discount something, we're going to give you $1 off a wholesale. And as a result, we expect you to pass it along to the consumer. I don't know the percentages, but I'm just going to guess, 50% of retailers just pocket that margin, because it's, between 280E and everything else, every dollar that they can get to help with that bottom line, they're going to take, right? So the consumer doesn't even sometimes see if we are to discount, they don't even get to see the discount. So that's even a different layer, but enforcing an MSRP is virtually impossible at this point.
What about, really choosing your partners wisely on the retail side, like maybe going on like a co-marketing campaigns where you're splitting the marketing cost to get Wana and these brands to get them on the shelf, and you're supporting the education, you're putting your marketing dollars behind it, and you expect certain level of price modeling in return.
And that is that's a great avenue. And for us, we obviously feel like we've built a pretty good brand, and so the co-marketing is a great way to introduce a partnership with a dispensary, with a retail partner. Some partners are up for that. Some partners have the resources and can join you in that. Others can't. And then, I think in some markets, it's those retail partners look only as far as slotting fees and say, well, if you want to be on our shelf, here's the slotting fee. You can only do that so many times, right? You can't give $5,000 to every dispensary every month to be on their shelves. So there is a fine line between what's co-marketing and what's strictly paying to be on somebody's shelf. And sometimes those are the dances we have to have. And honestly, as a brand, you have to be willing to walk away. I mean, that's true for negotiations in general. You always have to, if you're going to negotiate hard, you got to be able to be willing to walk away from it, right? And just know that going into it. So there are some dispensaries where you just say, we can't do that. We can't, we just can't do it. And so, we stay true to our brand and we try and stay on top of that, but it's a challenge. I think marketing is a great tool. And we use it quite a bit, but there are also others where it just doesn't work.
Yeah. And Brian says, stay true to your value prop. And it's the same thing for retailers. Like as a retailer, you should know where you stand in the market. Like, are you a value retail shop? Do you always need to offer discounts because that's what your consumers expect? Or are you differentiating yourselves? Are you, higher customer service, more, faster delivery times? You have maybe exclusivity with some brands that you can offer. So there's different ways. Like, do you focus on, we have a partner up in the Bay Area. Is like, they focus heavy on drinks, especially for summer. Like, they have the biggest catalog of drinks. How do you optimize your catalog to make sure it's in line with the consumer demand? Like, there's all these things that you can do to ensure that you're not racing to the bottom, right? Because then there's no margins for anyone.
So all of those are good examples of value prop to the consumer that you as the retailer should expect to see some premium or some lift from, right? But the problem that I think what happens is that during good times when people are buying, I think it's easier for a dispensary to say, well, this is how we're going to treat the customer, and this is how we're going to create our value proposition. The second that things start to get a little bit challenging, the easiest answer for them is to say, well, we'll just cut pricing.
Yep.
Cut pricing, drive more traffic. 99 times out of 100, that's what's going to happen. And so back to Brian's point about staying true to your value prop, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Do you stay true to that value prop, or do you cave and say, okay, well, we're just going to cut prices and drive traffic?
Yeah. And just working with Washington State for going on like 7 years now, like, this was the talk, long time ago. And, now that market, has some partners up there. It's like 30-40% of their transactions have to have a discount.
It's been decimated.
Yeah.
We're not in Washington right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so it's things to think about as a retailer, and, really hold your brand strong and stay true to that value prop on the brand side.
And have confidence that the consumer is smart enough to know what value you're offering and to be willing to pay an extra dollar or two for it here and there. Not all consumers, right? There's that consumer that wants to shop at Ross, but there's also the consumer that wants to shop not at the Rack, but at Nordstrom. So, just think about where you are.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk about, the different markets. So, like, say you're a big brand in New York City and you want to expand in Southern California. Like, how should a brand go about tailoring the overall marketing messaging to fit the new market?
That is probably a culmination of a lot of things we've been talking about. So first of all, study the market, understand, what the market is, because to the point, whether it's California to New York or New York to California, East Coast, West Coast, we know that's been a long-standing feud, right? So they're not the same markets. They don't consume the same. Everything from, what do they consume? So, flower being in New York being pretty flower heavy, delivery being entrenched in New York. We all know the size of the illicit market in New York. I don't know the exact size of it, but it's large illicit market. and so, how have you tailored your processes to adapt to that in New York? And does that fit in California? So California, potentially you have direct consumer opportunities, right?
Yep.
That you don't have in other markets, and certainly don't have currently in New York. So how can you leverage that to reach a different set of consumers, and what's appealing to that consumer in a direct consumer model that isn't the same as maybe the retail model in New York? Two, think about the positioning we were just talking about. So, understand who you are as a brand, because when you go into Southern California, the competition is vast and heavy and it's everywhere, right? And so you really have to be able to say to the consumer that is either shopping online or walking to a store, like, who am I to you? Why do I matter as a brand to you? Third, I think for Southern California and Northern California, treating those as really separate states almost, having one or two really key partners. I'm a big fan of like starting small and growing little pockets of loyalty, right? Versus going into Southern California saying we're going to cover everything, right? Well, that is challenging, not just because of the geography, not just because it takes 2 hours to get from point A to point B in LA, but also just because they're so vastly different and they're small little communities, right? But if you can start with little ones and have successes and then have them grow together, eventually you're gonna kind of connect all the dots, so to speak. And I think that's a good approach, at least from my perspective. So
find those partners and make sure that On the marketing side, I look at it as the spray and pray approach. Like, yeah, you can do that, or you can choose specific markets. There's other markets outside of LA, San Diego, Orange County, Inland Empire. There's all these different markets, Santa Cruz, like that are smaller and less competitive. Maybe they may be in better line with your brand as well. Like if you have a cannabis drinks brand, like, okay, well, should probably be near the beach, right? Like it's
good point. Right? Exactly. And it's, goes back to too, like setting your goals and your intention when you go to a market. If you think you're going to go into Southern California and you're going to dominate and be everywhere, okay. I mean, sure, but you're going to have to spend a ton of money to do that. And you're probably not going to be successful for a while. So make sure you have those metrics set up that say we're either hitting goal or not. And we need to pivot if we're not.
Yeah. And you touched on this a little bit. How can a brand anticipate changing consumer preferences in a market? And, like what should you watch out for? And is there a scenario like where you've pulled out of a state completely?
So I'm sorry, repeat that question to me.
How can a cannabis brand anticipate changing consumer preferences in the market? So, that's
so that, the answer to that is, I don't know that you can never fully anticipate it, but I think having feet on the ground and also or boots on the ground, as I guess is the right expression. I do that all the time. I mix up my metaphors. So having boots on the ground, and then also making sure you invest in data, right? So making sure that you know what is actually taking place, even if it's lagged, if it's sales data through the headsets, the BDSAs of the world, Alpine IQ. There's a number of really great platforms out there. Even there's a little bit of lag time in that, you can begin to analyze consumer trend and see like, oh, that's interesting. There's a flavor profile. Blueberry has, just shot up over the last 3 months. We've seen, 20% growth across, all the brands that have a blueberry flavored product. Well, maybe that's a preference change, right? Or a certain subcategory, gummies have grown or they've shrunk. So I think really being in tune with that data, which when, you and I first started on the adult use side of things, that data didn't exist. So I for many, many years, we didn't have access to that data. So who knew, right? But now we do. And so you better avail yourself of that data if you want to stay on top of those market trends. And, if you got to be prepared to pivot. And you said earlier, you're like, make sure you've got a contingency plan in dollars to be able to support that. If you're a chocolate company or gummy company, you may not, I'm not suggesting that you want to, watch those trends and say, well, gosh, gummies went down 10%. Let's get into chocolate because it went up 2%. That goes back to standing, being the brand that you are and being true to that. But flavor profiles, or if you see live rosin, for example, that's partly why we launched a live rosin product here in Colorado and plan to bring it to other markets. We knew that was an emerging trend, and we really wanted to be in front of it. So, watching those trends and taking advantage of the upside is really where I think the benefit is. On the downside, if you're a gummy company and you see the gummies are plummeting by 40%, maybe it's not the market for you, and you should just cut your losses early and run.
Yeah. We do have a question from the audience from Kevin McIlwee. How do you manage packaging versions across SKUs and the different state regulations? Do you have a dynamic content creation tool to automate versioning? That's more on the packaging side.
No, Kevin. I mean, my guess is that you've got involvement with that type of a tool, and we don't use that currently. And I think it's potentially feasible, and it's probably just my education level about how that dynamic versioning can work. But so many of them are so unique that we have in-house graphic design. Most of our creative content is done in-house. Which, by the way, back to the brand piece, I think is important too. We don't use a ton of agencies. We use agencies when there's particular expertise like video content or whatever that we don't have in-house. But most of the brand stuff resides in-house, which, back to the labeling, means that if we have to make a sudden change to packaging in a given market due to regulation, that my team is the one doing that. Now, we also have a great partner with Calix who supports us on that. So we've gotten to a point where it was so overwhelming with so many markets to be able to make all of these little minor tweaks, which for graphic designers out there, and I am not one, but I know that if you change a word, it can completely shift the entire die lines and everything else, and it's not as easy as someone would think just to change a word, right? And usually, by the way, it's more than just a word. But so Calix helps us with a lot of that. So we were able to offload on them as a partner and say, can you help us, just redesign the language on the side panels? But for the primary, for the front facing brand pieces of this, we have a team that does it, and it varies by market. And it's black and white in Florida, and it's no fruit in Nevada, and it's cutting edge, latest greatest here in Colorado. And so we end up with 15 different products, across all SKUs, 15 different markets, and however many SKUs in each market. It's challenging to stay on top of, and my team often pulls their hair out as a result.
I'm sure I would do the same. When Wana enters a market, what do you do to educate consumers, retailers, and budtenders so they understand, the brand inside and out?
So that's a great question. And Wana is, really focused on that education piece and education as it relates to the products, but of course the brand and the education kind of are one and the same, right? Because that's a big cornerstone for us as a brand. So we focus heavily on budtender training. So we use a couple of key partners. Zoltrain is a great one that we use pretty regularly. And so we're able to work with our partners in an expansion market and say, Zoltrain is our platform. This is one of my goals, by the way, when I started with Wana, was to kind of standardize on some of this stuff so that when we go into a new market, we say, this is our training platform. We would like you guys to, share this out with all the budtenders and all the stores, and here's how it works. And it actually has been pretty good for us to be able to do that. So that's kind of the front line, is that deeper education for the budtenders. We also use platforms like Leaf VIP in Michigan. We're doing a pilot with them to understand, can we get feedback from those budtenders on the education, and that kind of reinforces it as well. And then the consumer level, everything from the way the education leads on our website to printed materials in the store. We just launched our live rosin gummies, as I mentioned earlier, here in Colorado, and we used a QR code to link to some AR content. So when you use your phone and you hover over the QR code, I thought, yeah, I do have one right here. You hover over the QR code, it brings up a completely interactive experience on your phone that provides a lot of education. It's fun, but it also provides a lot of education about the product. So every touch point that we have with the consumer or the budtender leads with education. That becomes part of the brand. As far as our brand positioning within a given market, education is important to us.
Yeah, I'm actually going to post that here in the Zoom chat. So Zoltrain, yeah, I've seen that a lot, actually. It's been really helpful for some of our campaigns, increasing the conversion rate in some of those landing pages, ensuring that the education is there, and not sending people just to a shopping cart, just one paragraph about the product with one picture. Like there's a lot more to it than that, right?
Yeah. And it's a disservice to the consumer in some markets, because going back to Florida, like, we're not even allowed to provide, certain education, certain pieces about, our products are, gluten-free, or this product is intended for sleep. There are markets where we're not allowed to say that. So it's really important that we are able to communicate the education, at least to the budtender, so they can get that down to the consumer in the store.
Yeah. And I've heard you speak a lot about community initiatives. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of investing in CSR, community social responsibility initiatives, and how to incorporate them into your business model?
Yeah, I'd love to, and thank you for that, because it's CSR is really important for us. And one of the things that we did is we hired a director of CSR. So Carla heads that up for us, and she's awesome, and has many years of experience with it. So she is a one woman show in terms of, in each of our markets, finding partners that align, first of all, with our missions. And we have cornerstones. We're still developing it a little bit, to be honest, because we've got a lot of exciting things coming up that I'll hopefully be able to share, like in August. But we're putting a big push behind our CSR initiatives. She's leading that up, but requires us to find nonprofit partners in each market, but also make sure that we're clear on what it is that we're looking to support. Because I think you used the expression spray and pray earlier. I mean, it's kind of the same with CSR. You can just say, well, we support all kinds of things, but you water down your message. You lose a little bit of the value of the volume of work that you can do within one or two particular categories. So establishing what you stand for on the CSR side, putting your money where your mouth is, putting your team behind it so that you give opportunities, whether it's in an expansion market or whether it's in your headquarter market, but giving your employees rather opportunities to engage in those initiatives, and whether that's through volunteering or to even suggest who we should be engaging with. That's equally important. And looking at partners, looking at our partners and saying, what are you doing in the market? Like we'll help support that, but what are your goals from a CSR perspective in the market? And if you don't have them, we'd like you to have them, because that's what makes a good partner, in our opinion, is a company that supports their communities. But from a brand perspective, my goal for Wana on the CSR side is that we transcend cannabis. Like, I'm so proud of some of the partnerships that Carla has been able to develop for us, where we are the first, right? So League of Women Voters, last year we did a big push on vaccinations, which was, by the way, back to something that brands stand for. It was very controversial. I can't even believe the number of negative posts and things we got when we were posting about these vaccine clinics that we did in conjunction with some of our pop-ups. It was surprising to me, but then again, I said, first of all, I mean, some of them were ridiculous. Like, why are you forcing people to get a vaccination before they buy your products? That's not what we're doing. We're saying, hey, there's a vaccine clinic right here if you'd like one as you're leaving or going into the dispensary. But that aside, the negative feedback was such that we had to say, okay, we hear you, we understand. If that alienates you from our brand, we're sorry, but this is what we stand for and this is what we believe in. So that gives the CSR work gives you an opportunity to really also create that identity and say, this is what we stand for.
Yeah, and that's more important now than ever. Yeah, I mean, we've either in line with the brand values or the CEO behind it, whether it's like someone very loud like Elon Musk or like Bill Gates or whoever else on the leader side, right? Like it's
Nancy's not loud,
yeah,
but she's very specific about her intent to support our communities, and that top to bottom is kind of how we approach it, and it's Nancy's vision and her voice that we're supporting.
Yeah. And before we hop here, I want to spend some time on marketing. Like, what do you prioritize on the marketing side? Like, how are you ensuring that consumers are aware of the brand in new markets? Like, what type of marketing campaigns do you invest in?
This is a funny question, because you and I, MediaJel and I have been talking about some of the challenges with display and programmatic.
Yep.
In that we have a hard time as a brand being able to tie back to actual conversions, right? So be able to track it from, hey, I made this person aware of our product in our launch, to they bought the product in a store. Retailers, it's a little bit easier, but for us as a brand, it's challenging. So a little bit of that, right, to at least create broad awareness. I look at programmatic as an awareness tool for us. I'd like it to become a conversion tool, but for now it's an awareness tool. So some programmatic, obviously social, big part of our launches. However, within certain platforms, I'm not telling you anything anyone doesn't know, like Instagram, Facebook, very challenging to really get too much detail about where you buy the product, how much it costs, what's in it. You got to be a little bit vague, but at least, being able to say, hey, we're in Arkansas now, you can buy our products, just make the consumer broadly aware. I would say we also do a lot of our work through our CSR initiatives, like we mentioned. So we invest there. The biggest part of my budget, and I laugh at this sometimes, I tell people this, regularly, it's swag. I mean, it is a never ending beast. I mentioned Eric earlier, he calls me the chief swag officer, because every market wants more. I mean, no matter how much I create, how much we create, there's never enough. And that really helps to cement your brand in the eyes of the Budtenders as well as the consumers. We do a lot of events, like this summer, we're doing our Summer of Quick tour. So those are all in person. We have a van, we do, games and, all kinds of good stuff at the store level. Swag, a big part of that. So, that really drives a lot of our marketing initiatives.
Now, speaking of that, where's my swag, Joe?
Oh, you didn't get the box I sent you? That's weird. I'll check the tracking number on that.
Yeah, let me check my mailbox here. We got a question from the audience here. This is from Rachel Smith. Do your R&D and formulation teams work with your marketing team collaboratively to determine line extensions and new product offerings?
Great question. And yes, everything. So one of the, I think the strengths that we have at Wana is that we do everything pretty collaboratively. I just before this call, we were on we're looking at redoing some of our packaging. And so we were looking at some different variations and versions. And there were multiple departments on that call. So it's not just marketing making that decision. It's a lot of people in the company. One small example, but back to the R&D side, Mike Hennessy, who's our VP of Innovation, our teams are in constant and regular contact. And Mike, you'll see Mike actually takes a big role in a lot of our video content. Mike is just such a great guy and so smart and knowledgeable, and also comes across so well on video that we did a whole series of educational videos with Mike. So there's a very good relationship between R&D and marketing. I don't think there's ever been a case where well, that's not true. I was gonna say there's never been a case where we've like necessarily put the kibosh on something as marketing, but in conversations we have about, let's say, new product lines, there may be an innovation or a reason that Mike and his team want to do R&D on something, but when we look at it as a marketing team, we would say, okay, well, that's not really on brand, and here's why. That's the kind of dialogue we have. Conversely, if we see trends, or if we see things that we think might be an opportunity for us, we can go to Mike's team and say, hey, can we do a little research on this and see what the potential feasibility is of it? And the best time that it happens is when he comes across a technology or a new innovation that they are really able to flesh out. And then we bring in marketing. We say, okay, well, how do we communicate this? How do we productize it? How do we commercialize it? That's where the real coordination comes.
Thank you for that, Joe. Any other questions from the audience before we kind of wrap up here? I'll give it a few more minutes. Thank you again, Joe, for joining us and sharing your insights. As sure audience, here on Zoom and beyond on LinkedIn, YouTube, and all the other social platforms has enjoyed all the information. And I'm going to post your LinkedIn here in the Zoom chat just so everyone has it. If you'd like to follow Joe on LinkedIn. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Joe, before we depart ways here, about Wana, about yourself, about the vision, the mission going forward?
Just first of all, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it, and I always enjoy talking to you. So that's first and foremost. And also I appreciate the questions and the input from everybody. But I think in terms of Wana, just remember that the brands can be more than just a product on the shelf at a price point, and continue to build your brands, but also to respect other brands, because I don't think the industry is going to grow appropriately if we don't get a hold of this idea of discounting and just kind of going willy-nilly wherever we can. We have to be more thoughtful and methodical about what we do, and we also have to think about our communities, and that's just this is part and parcel of who we are as Wana, and I would encourage everyone to have that consideration as well.
Yeah. There's a lot of things going on in the world right now. So make sure you're intentional with whatever you support. Yeah. Whatever's in line with your brand, and you stay true to that.
Yep, exactly.
Well, thank you again, Joe, and thank you everyone for watching. And once again, this is the MediaJel podcast. We cover everything on the marketing, tech, advertising front, and on the MediaJel side, we have a ad network of compliant advertising publishers. We got 75,000 plus, meme sites, mainstream news sites, dating, gaming, music streaming apps, TV, podcasts. Like, you can advertise cannabis on all these, and all these publishers welcome it. So I want to make sure that everyone's aware of that there's more beyond billboards and weed maps nowadays. So have a wonderful evening and wonderful rest of the day, and happy 4th of July weekend. Cheers.
Thank you.